Good morning, sixth grade Egyptians. The reason I'm calling y'all Egyptians today is because we are starting our unit on ancient Egypt. As always, we're going to start by talking about Egypt's geography. How did civilization in Egypt begin? That is the question we will be answering today. I want to begin by reading this primary source document. This is an Egyptian hymn. A hymn is a song of praise. When you praise something, that means you really, really appreciate it and like it. Praise to you, O Nile, that issues from the earth and comes to nourish Egypt. If his flood is low, breath fails, and all people are impoverished, the offerings to the gods are diminished, and millions of people perish. The whole land is in terror. When he rises, the land is in exultation, and everybody is in joy. He fills the storehouses and makes wide the granaries. He gives things to the poor. Ancient Egyptian hymn, Song of Praise. So what this is all about is it's talking about how when the Nile River flooded in ancient Egypt, that was a really, really great thing for Egyptians. Let's find out why today. Before we do that, I'd like you to answer this review question on your page. Why did Mesopotamians settle near the Tigris and Euphrates rivers? Go ahead and pause the video to answer this. Welcome back, and your answer should mention that rivers provide drinking water, fertile soil, and travel and trade opportunities. Mesopotamia and Egypt have a lot of similarities. They're both complex, interesting civilizations. They have polytheistic religions. They're both in the region of Asia that we call the Middle East. And most of all, they're both dependent on important rivers. As you can see in the image, I've circled Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia depended on the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And just like that, in ancient Egypt, they depended on the Nile River. The most important river for Egyptians is the Nile. The Nile is a unique river. It's the longest river in the entire world at 4,200 miles. Compare it with our Mississippi River, which is only 2,320 miles long. Something else that makes the Nile unique, it runs from south to north. That's right, the water flows upward toward the Mediterranean Sea. Answer questions 1 and 2 on your page. Go ahead and pause the video to do this now. The Nile River runs vertically through Egypt. On your map, shade in the area around the river. Pause to do this now. This is the fertile soil, and it's only about 12 miles wide on either side of the river. This land is also known as the Black Land. Black land means the fertile soil used by Egyptians for agriculture. The part of the Nile where the river runs into the sea is called the delta. This area was the most fertile soil of all. If you look at the top of the river, the most northern part, the river splits into many different directions, and it flows right into the Mediterranean Sea. This part of the river is known as the delta. Answer question 3 on your page and pause the video to do this now. But the land outside of the Black Land was not fertile at all. This was called the Red Land. This was the barren, dry desert of Egypt. Even though Red Land was dry and bad for farming, it did offer one advantage: protection from enemies. Egypt was surrounded on almost all sides by Red Land, so they didn't have to worry about invaders. It was too hot and dangerous to make a long journey across the desert, so other societies pretty much left the Egyptians alone for many years. Egyptians were also protected by the Mediterranean Sea to the north. Answer questions 4 and 5 on your page. Pause the video to do this now. Egypt is sometimes called the gift of the Nile. The Nile's flooding was gentle and predictable. Egyptians made a yearly schedule for planting and harvesting based on the reliable flooding of the river. When the Nile's waters were low, there was no water covering the farmland, and Egyptians were able to plant, cultivate, and harvest, or pick, their crops. But when the waters were high, the land was covered with water. While the waters were high, Egyptians still benefited from it. They used the Nile River to fish, throwing spears into the water. They also hunted the water birds that lived near the river. They also traveled north and south along the Nile in boats. Answer questions 6 and 7 on your page. Pause the video to do this now. Egyptians used the Nile to travel north to the Mediterranean Sea to trade with Mesopotamians and other neighbors. They traveled south to barter with the Nubians, who lived in what are now the African countries of Sudan and Ethiopia. Egyptians traded linen and papyrus, which was Egyptian paper, two of their own inventions, for things they wanted. They also had a surplus of grain, so they traded that for other food and spices. In this way, the Nile was a huge reason for cultural diffusion. It was the highway of ancient Egypt, connecting different cultures with one another. Cultural diffusion is something that we're going to be talking more about this year. But what you need to know for now is just that cultural diffusion is when one culture influences another. Answer questions 8 and 9 on your page. Pause the video to do this now. All right, 6th grade Egyptians, I'm very excited for us to continue talking about ancient Egypt in the next few days. Please make sure all questions are answered. Make sure you will be ready to talk about and discuss your answers with your teacher. And as always, 6th graders, keep it 100.